Check, check. All right, guys. I'm going to wait just one moment to see if the video is coming through. All right. Micah says we are live AF. So we are going to go ahead and get started here. Oh, I need to turn my sound off. There we go. All right. Cool. So tonight we are going to do a beginner's guide to Ableton Live 10. And I have a beer. Tonight's beer is Prank Calls to Satan, a black ale from Wiseacre. It's fantastic. And this is the default Ableton Live 10 view after install. Now, if you are new to Ableton Live and you're just getting started in production, you may have downloaded the Ableton 10 Lite version. And I get a lot of questions from people who are starting with Ableton, and their questions mainly are, if I buy Lite or if I'm using Lite, what is the difference between Lite and regular Ableton, the full suite? And the only real difference is there's a few of the instruments that aren't included. There's a few of the expansion plugins that aren't included. Those plugins are generally for more advanced users anyway. So there's a color limiter, some spectral blur, things that you're not going to generally use right off the bat anyway with Ableton Live. I started with Ableton Live Lite, and I moved from there. The other difference is, sorry if you can hear my dog drinking in the background. She just decided to come down and have a sip of water. The other difference between Live Lite and the full suite is the inclusion of Max MSP for Ableton Live. So what Max MSP does is it allows you to build your own expansion packs, your own instruments. It allows you to use programming inside of Max Live for routing, so you can route different things in live scenarios. Again, a very advanced feature, but I do use a lot of Max MSP plugins in my day-to-day workflow. I haven't started doing that until pretty recently, but what I'll do is I'll find a Max instrument I really like, and then I can open it up inside of Max and modify it and route it and do all kinds of fun, funky stuff to it. Again, a totally advanced feature, a feature that a majority of people aren't going to be willing to pay an extra $200 for. Now, if you download Live right now because of what's going on with COVID, you get it for 90 days for free, the Lite version. And that version is going to come with a majority of everything that we're going to talk about here today. So go over to Live or just Google Ableton Live Lite demo and download it, and you'll be able to do everything. You'll be able to set up files, and I think the export features are enabled. And you can definitely save everything you work on. So if you decide at the end of the 90 days to purchase it, then you'll be set. The other thing is, if you are a student or if you have been in school in the last 12 months, you can use your student ID to email. You can make a copy of it and email it to Ableton, and they'll give you a drastic discount. It's much cheaper to purchase the educational version, and those licenses last forever, and they're good against upgrades. Okay, so that's my sales pitch for Ableton Live purchases. I have run a cracked version of Live probably the first year or so that I had it. I hate running cracked software. I'm a developer myself. I know that money goes to good use. I know that Ableton provides an amazing product for the price. And besides from that, I couldn't trust it to not crash when I was performing using Ableton. So that's a really great transition now into what we're looking at. So this is a fresh install of Ableton, and there's a few things that you should get familiar with right off the bat. The first, we're just going to start from the top and work our way down through the screen. So in the upper part of the screen, you'll see your sort of global tempo, You'll see your time signature here. This is your metronome, which you can turn on and off. You can set your metronome to different levels. This is a carry feature that allows you to scrub as the song is playing in different views. You have your play, stop, record features, which are pretty standard throughout all digital audio workstations. You have your looping features over here. The other cool thing that you'll need to do right off the bat is in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a little arrow you can turn up. Now, if you're just learning Ableton Live, this is fantastic. This is an information box. And what it does is anything you mouse over in Ableton, it will immediately tell you what that piece of UI does. So if you don't know what something does, simply expand that box and you'll be able to tell. And it looks like my screen share may have frozen. Give me 1 second. Give me just 1 second. Let's see if I can redo this really quickly. Yeah, she's died. Sorry about that. Add back a window capture. Give me 1 second, guys. So we're doing this with 2 different laptops, so that I can easily run Ableton and not bog down the current laptop that I'm on. So we're having to do a little screen share magic here. So give me just 1 second, and I'm gonna boot it back up. Cool. I'm going to do it over here as well. All right. Can see it again. All right, guys, give me 1 second. I'm going to reboot the stream, and I will be right back, and we'll start this right over, okay? Sorry about that. All right, we're gonna see if you guys can see me over here. I had to change laptops because the other one was not participating. Sometimes this happens. So let's see if you guys see me now. Check 1 2, check 1 2. Yeah, there we go. All right, I'm live. Cool. So, gonna minimize Open Broadcast Server, and let's see what we can do over here. Micah, if you are on Slack, let me know everything is cool. Okay, awesome. So we're gonna jump back into this. So across the top bar, this is all of your generalized system settings. Hold on 1 second. Micah says we're blinking. Micah. Let me see what's going on here. We had such good luck with this the other night. It's so crazy that we're not having such good luck with it at the moment. I guess that's the way it goes sometimes, right? Give me 1 second. All right, we've evened out now. We've buffered everything, and I think that we're ready to go. So, if you need to know what anything is, picking back up, this bottom left-hand corner is going to be your main information screen, where you can sort of mouse over anything and it'll tell you what it is. So this is the MIDI arrangement, where you can play keys over something you've already played and it'll rearrange your keys. This is automation, which is one of my personal favorites. This is the disable and re-enable automation. So it kind of goes on and on and on here. These are the looping functions. You can tell it how long to loop. And then there's some edit functions. You can unroll a MIDI keyboard. There's MIDI capturing. So when that's selected, you can attach all of your MIDI devices to all the different features inside of Ableton, which is great. And then the little processor indicator over here on the right, which is going to give you knowledge about how much of your processor is being used. So if you hear some hiccuping or some blinking or some weirdness, that's going to be super important too. Let me see if I can adjust the settings here so you guys can see my mouse. Capture. Yeah, I'm not sure how to enable my mouse, so we're just going to go with it. All right, so the view that when you open up Ableton, this is commonly what is known as session view. So session view enables you to load clips into a session. And it allows you to perform in real time, which is what live is mostly known for, is its ability for you to perform and create inside of it. And then on the other side of session view, this little button up here on the right is arrangement view. Now, if you work in another digital audio workstation, you're probably very familiar with this view. It looks very much like Logic, or even some parts of Fruity Loops, or people more commonly know like the Pro Tools session view looks very much like this. So if you've ever worked in a big studio with Pro Tools, this is kind of the view you get. But first we're going to talk about the session view. So just to the left of the session view is the UI, where you can access most of the stuff that makes sound. So Ableton comes with a ton of different sounds. Okay, Micah, if you can hear this, I'm not using the screen sharing app anymore. This is where all the sounds are stored. So these are the default sort of sounds inside of Ableton Live. And you can play these sounds. I have to plug in my headphone jack so I can actually hear the sounds. You can play these sounds back just by clicking on them. So you can preview them by selecting any of the sounds under any of the instrument banks and actually listening to them. Aside from that, right below all the different instrument banks on the left-hand side is the drums. And this is the second thing that everybody starts looking for. So you have live drum kits. You have a bunch of live drum kits. You have things like a flamingo drum kit, which is more like Latin percussion. You have a glass kit, which is like field recordings of glass bottles. 707, 909, like all of your main things that you would need right out of the box to get going making music. Instruments. So Ableton comes with 11 or 12 default instruments. And I want to jump into some of these really quickly because if you're going to be making dance music specifically, I think that this is the place where you generally spend most of your time. The instruments are, some are synthesizers. Wavetable is an amazing synthesizer. Operator is also like a really cool very minimal sort of synthesizer. So you can make just a basic sine wave or a saw wave, and then you can oscillate them and you can filter them. And it is so handy when you're just wanting to write like a very simple bass note or a very simple polytone. That's kind of like my general go-to workhorse for simple additive synthesis inside of Ableton Live. Wavetable, on the other hand, is a monster. It's a total workhorse. It's a big, beautiful wavetable-based synthesis engine that Ableton wrote specifically for Live 10. It definitely is one of those type of synthesizers that you can sort of use for a multitude of different things. And the really awesome thing about Wavetable, kind of what it's known for, is if you have a sound you like, you can drop the sound onto the wavetable and it will use that wavetable synthesis to make its own synthesizer version of that noise, which is really awesome and super, super fun to play with. So aside from those two, the next thing that you should really have a good grip on is drum rack. Drum rack is the most basic synthesizer you could ever imagine. So you can drop any sound file onto these banks and you get a complete piano roll of banks, and then you can just trigger them with any MIDI device, or you can write your own MIDI clips to trigger the sounds. And I use this a lot because I'm multi-sample drum machines. So if I can't afford a drum machine, I'll go and borrow one, and then I'll multi-sample all the sounds that it makes, and I'll make a drum rack out of it. And then I can come back in drum rack and program out sort of all my percussion and that sort of thing, and it will just play the sounds back in a very basic manner. So I'm going to pull up some sounds really quickly. Drum hits, and let's just do like, I don't know, drum kits. Not sure if those have it in there. So here's like some live percussion, right? And if I drop all of these guys on here, you'll see it just automatically fills the drum rack with those samples. So each one of these little banks has each different sample that I dragged and dropped on top of it. And then I can go into a MIDI clip and I can actually program these guys out so that they make sense. So if I was gonna make like a 4/4 drum beat, I could just tap and then it would create the drum beat in a MIDI clip, which is really awesome. Okay, so back to the instruments. We don't want to get lost here. The other really important instruments that you end up using a ton is Simpler. So Simpler is a very simple sampler, for lack of a better term. The default noises in Simpler are awesome, and you can use them for a plethora of different things. I love making my own Simpler banks, and I'll just drag one of theirs on here really quickly. But the really cool part about Simpler is it has this multi-sample mode where you can drop a whole bunch of different samples and then modulate them on a key. So essentially, like if you drop something that's in C sharp, you can modulate it into G minor by using the piano roll. And then you can do that with multiple samples across the bank. So it allows you to do a whole bunch of things in one instrument. And it is generally very simple. Let me see if I can put the bank up real quick. Yeah, so if you look down here, these different parts, these are all the same instrument, but each one has a multi-sample in it. So if I was to play like the upper octave on my keyboard, you would hear one instrument. If I was going to play the lower octave on the keyboard, you would hear a secondary instrument, which is super nice. That one I use pretty much constantly. The rest of the instruments you can sort of go and play with yourself. There's one that does called Electric, which is like, it's a string instrument sampler synthesizer. So it actually simulates the tones that pulled tension strings make in different instruments. So it has a bass, it has some pianos and some keys. And then there are these awesome instrument racks. And the instrument racks in here are their version of a whole bunch of different instruments and effects piled on top of each other to accomplish something. So like if we wanted some chimes blowing in the wind, like this is a stack of instruments that's been put together. And here it looks really simple. I'm clicking over on the side to unfold it, and you can see all of the different Ableton instruments that are in here to sort of make this instrument sound like it does. So it has a simpler, and then it has a delay, and then it has a reverb, and all of these things stacked together sort of gives it its sound. So we're going to move on from instruments. You can explore this panel on your own. There's a ton of stuff in here to play with. The next thing we're going to walk through is audio effects. So audio effects are sort of this essential thing that every DAW has. Now, I've never worked in another digital audio workstation software that has the amount of audio effects built in that you can chain together and do stuff with like Ableton does. Ableton's amazing because you can put effects inside of instruments. You can use instruments to control effects. The routing in Ableton is amazing. So the audio effect panel I spend a ton of time with. And again, this is another section that you can go through, and if you know anything about the effects, you can pull them in and play with them. If you don't know anything about the effects, this is a really fun place to experiment. If you've never played with a delay just makes things repeat over and over again at different lengths. It's a blast, and I use it on pretty much everything. There's this really nifty reverb delay mashup plugin called Echo that I've been using a ton. It sounds fantastic. I've actually seen lots of producers online giving different tutorials about how to use this effect to create entire songs, which is really fun. There's other things in here that you may need to mix down a track, like a nice compressor. So Glue Compressor is a fantastic compressor. There's several like compressors, tubes, different things that you can emulate, like overdrive. Pedal is a series of guitar pedals. Resonators resonate frequencies that you specify inside of a sound, so it gives it this real weird chambery sort of echoey thing. There's standard reverb, there's a saturator, but the thing that I use on every single channel is EQ8. EQ8 is an essential part of everything I do, because if you're going to make a song and you're going to use instruments that you need to control inside of the software, you're going to need to EQ them properly. So EQ8 is probably comparable to any third-party plugin equalizer that I've ever used. It has a beautiful spectrograph in the background. It has all kinds of different ways that you can control it. There's enveloping, so if you need to take out the bass, there's lovely filtering built in. If you need to take out the highs, if you need to enhance something, or if you need to sort of EQ it out. This EQ3 is default on every single channel when I start the program. So let's talk really quickly about setting some of these channels up. When I install Ableton Live for the first time, the first thing that I tend to do is create a template for myself to work from. And what this does is it gives me a starting point and a workflow where every single time that I start the program, I have what I need to immediately start making music. So I have enough channels, whether they're MIDI channels or playing instruments, or whether they are audio channels that are just playing back audio clips. I like to set all that up ahead of time. So what these vertical columns across the front of the screen are, each one of these is a channel. So this could be, channel 1 could be a MIDI instrument. Channel 2 could be a MIDI instrument. Channel 3 could be audio. Channel 4 could be audio. And part of the genius of Ableton Live is that when you drop audio into it, it's completely non-destructive. And this is sort of what made Live famous. Aside from its ability to warp anything into a different tempo, the sort of second key feature of it is that it does not destroy audio. So if you've ever used Pro Tools old Pro Tools, I should say, if you dropped an effect in Pro Tools in the mid 2000s and then you sort of did something to that effect and then you rendered it out, the audio always had that effect on it. Like then the piece of audio contained whatever modifications you had made. So if you chop it, rearrange it, you save it, that's it. You've done it. If you've ever used Audacity, it does the same thing. So like if you copy and paste a piece of audio on top of another, you've lost the piece of corresponding audio that you pasted on top of. Like there's no going back at that point. You can undo, but once you save it, it's saved and the file is what it is. Ableton Live, you can drop 1 million sounds anywhere onto the stage in Ableton Live, modulate them, change their pitch, change their tempo, put effects on them. And it's not actually changing the sound that you put into Ableton. All it's doing is adding those modifications inside of the memory of Ableton. So when you save it down to your file, there's all of this XML data that says everything that you've done to that audio. And then every time you load Ableton back, it loads those changes on top of the original audio. So you never sort of destroy the original piece of audio that you're working from, which is genius and fantastic. But aside from that, it makes the software run really fast. So when I perform in a live setting, which I've only done a few times, but I'll have generally 600 clips of audio and 5 channels of MIDI running at any given time. And every single one of those can run seamlessly without pegging any of the processor, without a chance of the software sort of like crashing mid-set. And the other cool thing that Ableton can do is if there's another laptop right next to it with the same file on it, you can actually run them in synchrony to one another. So like a lot of bands like Radiohead, every musician has a laptop and then a backup laptop that's underneath the stage that, or you know, it's somewhere within arm's reach that is running simultaneously, and all of these laptops are talking to each other through Ethernet, but they're all running the same or a similar Ableton session that is communicating with one another. So if Tom York is playing the guitar and he presses a pedal, his Ableton Live starts a series of effects in that audio channel. Then the laptop that the drummer is using to sort of program drum sequences or play drums into to loop also knows exactly what's going on, and it's running in tempo on top in another channel. So that's a really, really cool feature of the live aspect. All right, we're going to give this another go. We're having some trouble here tonight, guys. Micah, let me know if you can see me in the chat. All right, I think we're going again. Sorry about that. So I'm having some issues tonight with my internet apparently. And I am back. Okay, so the first thing I would do if I were performing live or if I was doing anything else is set up a template. So I always use at least 3 or 4 MIDI channels. And the MIDI channels are going to run my synthesizer plugins. They're going to run all kinds of stuff. So what I do is I select a MIDI channel and I just duplicate it a couple of times. Cool, that gives me 4. And then I would select an audio channel and I would duplicate that a couple of times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, great. So now I have 5 channels to dump audio into. Now the channels just to the right that are appearing over here, that say reverb and delay, those are sends and returns. So you can put an effect that several instruments are going to use on this channel, route the audio out to the channel, and then send it back. And if multiple channels are doing this, that means you only have one reverb running on multiple channels, and it saves you the amount of processor that you would have if there was a reverb on every single channel. Same for delay. So send returns are super helpful when you're setting up things and you're really limited on processor. Like I used to have a really old laptop and I had to use send returns all the time. It's also really helpful when you're performing live. So if you know you're going to need a certain effect at certain times in your performance, you don't have to run it on the channel that the instrument is playing on. You can send the audio out, run it, trigger it through a pedal, trigger it through some MIDI interface, and then activate it and turn it off, and you don't have to affect the actual instrument that is playing on that channel, which is super nice. Over here real quick, make sure we're still going. Cool. So the last channel on the end is always the master channel. And this is going to be where all your signal processing that comes out to your headphones or out to your sound card is going to happen. So usually I run like a limiter here to make sure it doesn't clip or send a too hot signal. I run a compressor to beef everything up depending on like what type of music I'm outputting. I'll run, a chain to make sure that anything below 100 hertz is running mono. So I can put like a utility plugin on there that makes sure that none of my bass is in stereo frequency. All of that sort of fun stuff goes on the master. Also, anytime you're exporting music from Ableton Live, you can export every single channel individually. You can export the master. So you want to make sure that your master is sort of set up in a way that when you export stuff back out of Ableton, it's exporting in the way that would sound the best, right? So I would drop an entire chain of plugins on the master to make sure that my audio sounded really good. Okay, so another thing that I always do when I'm starting Ableton template is I select every single channel. So I just selected all the channels at the top, and I type in -14. And that puts every single channel starting at -14 dB. Now, why do I do that? When you are making music in this program and you are going to output that music to anyone who may mix it or master it or engineer it, or if you're sending a signal out to a soundboard, anything over 0 dB when you send that signal out or when you export it is going to be too high. It's going to be loud and crunchy, and it's not going to work well. So I always start at -14 dB. So I have what is called headroom. And headroom is the amount of audio between 0.0 dB and everything below it, right? And so I want to give myself enough space where I can make some instruments louder, some instruments softer, and I have enough audio space there to work with. The problem with some of this is when you're starting out, Ableton Live runs 24-bit audio, which means essentially you have an infinite amount of headroom. You can change the audio and manipulate the audio in a way where it still sounds fine, but it's running way too hot to export. And so this confuses a lot of people who are new to Ableton. They don't understand why their audio sounds so crazy, and it's simply because they don't have the experience with mixing down audio and understanding that you want to send that audio signal out at a perfect 0 dB whenever it's finished. And so in order to like do all the final tweaks, the mastering, the mix down, you need that extra headroom to make corrections and then to bring all the audio up to sort of like radio volume. So it's really important to select all these channels and to start it out. Now, once I'm done with that, you can save your file somewhere. So I'm just going to save live set. And I would just save it as default template. And then what I would do is go into the preferences, and the first tab in preferences is use this file as your default. So every time that you start Ableton Live up from this point on, Ableton will start with this template loaded in. So on every single channel you would have this EQ. Every single channel would be -14 dB. That's not going to be something you have to go back and do every single time you start your file. If you know that there is a compressor that you pretty much use 80% of the time because you know how to use it, put that compressor on every single channel and simply come over here and turn it off. So there's a little tiny power button at the top of each instrument. And anytime you're not going to use something, you can simply turn it off. It'll sit on that channel and you don't have to use it. The other cool trick is you can double click the top of it and it'll just fold that instrument up so you don't have to look at it. So when you come into Ableton, your instruments can be sitting there, turned off, and then you can just turn them on and use them at will, and you don't have to go find them in the instrument effect rack. You don't have to like drag things all around and spend a bunch of wasted time doing that. It just speeds everything up. Okay, so walking back over here to our left-hand panel, we're going to keep cruising down here. There are MIDI effects, which are amazing. There's a arpeggiator, which I have written. Probably a majority of the songs that I've ever put out have this arpeggiator used in some sort of way. There's chord, which can detect and change the chord that is playing through MIDI. There is a MIDI effect rack, which has a whole bunch of different things that you can do in it. Note length, where you can simply modulate the length of any note that's being sent through the MIDI channel. Pitch does the same thing. You can move things up and down an octave. You can change the entire pitch of whatever's playing through that MIDI channel. Random, I use a ton. There's a whole set of tutorials on Resonant Advisor and on YouTube that techno producers using random to trigger notes inside of like an arpeggio to give it sort of variance, and it's really cool. You can change the entire scale of things. This is one of my favorite sort of things to do, is I'll write a bunch of little melodies in MIDI clips and just store them in my favorites, and then come back and use them in different songs, but then I'll just change the scale of that MIDI clip using the scale plugin. And you can set a root note and you can transpose them, and then you can do all kinds of great stuff. This scale tool is one of the best things Ableton has ever used. And then velocity, which changes the velocity of each note, or of a bunch of notes, or of a random note. So that's really fun. I have the Max for Live because I have the advanced one. I have a bunch of effects and instruments. Max repeats the folder structure of the left-hand side of Live, so it gives you audio effects, instruments, and MIDI effects. And these are all ones that are generated inside of Max for Live. I have my plugins folder. So these are all third-party plugins that have been installed. So if you purchase, say, if you're going to use Native Instruments Massive, or if you're going to use UHE Diva, or any of the Sound Toys effects, these are all going to live here. Now, one of the things people always ask me when we're doing introductory classes is, why are there different types of plugins? And the simplest answer is VST 3 plugins take advantage of 64-bit processing. So if you are using VST 3 and you have a brand new computer, your plugin's gonna be a lot faster. They're gonna respond a lot quicker. They're gonna use less processor. VST 2 is sort of a precursor. I don't use them anymore because I don't need them. And then there are some plugins that don't offer those versions. So there's some plugins that only offer the original, which is an audio units or a standard VST. So if I twirl down one of these toggles, you're gonna see the stuff that I have installed here. So like I have an Isotope suite, a Wave suite, my VST plugins. I have Sound Toys. I have some stuff from UHE. And then audio units has like everything, because that's like everything comes in audio units. So my Native Instruments, my Isotope, all that stuff. Okay, so the last two sets of windows is clips and samples. So anything that you've recently accessed through Ableton Live will show up in this window. So I haven't actually made any clips recently, so there's nothing in here. These are all of the samples that I've used recently. So if you see break booty 130 BPM, that's a breakbeat sample that I was using a couple of days ago in a track. And the cool thing is, if you are cruising through one of your folders and in Live, and you select a sample and you play with it, and then you don't do anything with it and you forget about it, it will still be in this samples window when you come back later. So you'll be able to like access all the stuff that you were using and be like, oh, I forgot about this conga. I want to use that. Okay, now, next next sort of window that is super important, packs. So if you go on abletonlive.com, all of these packs are going to be the additional things that you can purchase to add to Ableton. So Creative Extensions comes with a suite. These are the extra ones that I was talking about that you get if you purchase the full Ableton suite. There's the core library, which is sort of all the default samples and instruments. I have a couple installed here. Lada is something I use a lot. It's just a sampler. Outer Spaces is a reverb plugin that I use constantly. And then if you twirl down the last one of available packs, the great part about owning Live is you can load in any of these packs. They come with it. So I have purchased the Cold Cut MIDI Evolve sampler, which is like a MIDI manipulation tool. I can hit install, and in a moment it'll download, and then it'll be available up here in my packs. And you can install as many of those as you have hard drive space for, or you want to use them. Current project is just the project you're working on and all the files that are included in that project, and I'm not working on anything here. And then you can add your own sample folders. So if you click the add folder down here, this is going to be all of the folders that are on my production hard drive or on my Dropbox, and they're linked into Ableton, so I don't have to open those up in the Finder and dig through to find samples. So that sort of gets me going. And I set up my folders by year because I purchase a whole lot of things. I purchase a lot of samples. I make a lot of samples. And so inside each one of those folders for every year is the same exact structure, but just with specifics. So if we look at like my 2018 folder, it's set up with my project files, my MIDI clips, all my remix files, and then my samples for each one of my projects. And then those samples are busted out into instruments, drums, synthesizers, everything that I've used as a sample inside of those, or that I've made for that year. And generally when a new year starts, I like to go and get a fresh start. I keep every year in Ableton because I do go back and reference a lot of things that I've used before, but generally just a personal preference, I like to evolve and have new sounds and make new sounds. So every year I start a new one, and that's worked out pretty well for me in the past. Okay, so if everyone's still with me, yeah, we got packs on packs. I am going to take a sip of beer, chill for a second. All right, so let's get started with the performance view inside of Ableton. So again, I'm in session view here. This is the default mode. And if I was going to perform a song inside of Ableton and I was going to do that live, what I would do is I may dedicate these MIDI channels to the synthesizers that are in front of me. I would, load that piece of hardware into Live. So I would put it into a USB port and route it into Live. You'll notice in each one of these channels, it has MIDI from, or it has audio from, right? So this is the place where you can select which instruments play or modulate or work on any given channel. The cool part about that is you can also send it from one channel to another. So if you have a keyboard and you want to send the MIDI of a knob on that keyboard while you're playing the keyboard, you can send that MIDI information from this MIDI channel to another MIDI channel, or you can use that MIDI information to control a send return, so to modulate effects, to do sort of any sort of instrument manipulation that you may need done. So all of the routing is going to be done here. And the really important thing to remember here is that if you're using external instruments and something doesn't seem to be working, the first place that you check is this series of drop downs, because the chance is that you're just not sending the MIDI notes or the MIDI signal from that device to the correct place. This is where you also send audio from the MIDI device into the master. So as I move down here, this is more of the area that I use a lot in performing. So what I'll do is I will render out stems, which is an individual sample for each one of the tracks in my song. And then I will stack those samples in this view. And then I will trigger the samples using like a launch pad, or using like just a very, very basic MIDI controller. So there's a million of these. They start at like $40 and they go to like 1,000. So this is the view that I sort of trigger things from. So I just want to show you really quickly. I'm going to go in here and find some samples, and I just want to show you really quickly like the power of this. So there's a bass line. I'm going to drop a bass line on here, and I have no idea what these are. There is, I'm going to go into drum loops. I'm going to drop a hat and a stomp and a perk. So if these were the tracks to the song that I was going to be playing live, and they were the audio from that song, they load into a clip. So if I double click on that, I can see this clip view down here, right? And this is just the bass notes in a loop. Now, the best part about this performance view is that you can play 1, you can play 2, you can play 3, you can play 4, and what you're going to start to do is you're going to start to hear every single one of those playing. And another thing that you're going to see down here is while they're playing, they are looping. So you get a loop count, and you can sort of control each one of these loops individually. Now, normally what I would do is I would control the loops via a launch pad or via controller, so that you can't kind of screw it up. The launch pad lights up with every single one of the clips that is active, and it blinks, and it gives you these sort of visual indicators about what is playing, which is really nice. So that is sort of the base of my live show. And I'm going to catch over here real quick because I think some people may have some questions. Yeah, so favorite hardware synth. You know, the Roland stuff is unbeatable. Everybody I know that performs live, Christina Chatfield comes to mind, Larry Hurd, everybody who actually does a live show loves the Roland clones. They're super reliable. They're very affordable. Probably like my favorite hardware synth is going to be the Roland 303 clone. I generally stay away from the Behringer stuff because I don't like their politics, but that's just a personal preference. A lot of people love the Behringer clones that have been coming out recently too. And I'm a sucker for Moog. I think Moog is just, it's classic. It sounds classic. It's incredible. It's made by really good people. So I love like the Moog, the old and the new Moog synths are like, if you can afford them, they're fantastic. So those are definitely really good starting places. I've also been informed that you can't hear my sound coming out of Ableton, which is fine for just showing all intents and purposes. Okay, so back to clips in the clip view. What you're going to notice is that Ableton default warps your audio into the master tempo of your track. Now, this is a feature. This is the primary feature of Ableton. You can take anything and live remix it or manipulate it into this master tempo. Now, that is fantastic, and it generally works really well. Like the Ableton warping processor is incredible, but it's a computer. It's not genius, right? It doesn't know everything. And so sometimes you get warp markers, which is what these are, that stretch and protrude the audio in a precarious way and makes it not on beat, or it makes it not exactly how you wish. So I tell people to always go and check once you've dropped a clip in Ableton and check these markers and check where your audio has landed and make sure that it's landed on the grid that you want it to, because Ableton is going to lock it to this grid system automatically, and sometimes it gets it right, sometimes it doesn't. It just depends on how complex the audio is generally. So you can see down here too, there's a little warp guy. If I turn it off, it changes the audio to just play outside of the master clock. So it's just going to play whatever tempo the audio was originally played in. When I click warp on, it turns it on, and then it all snaps to the grid. Now, there's a lot of other settings in here that you can mess with. You can transpose the audio in real time. You can detune it. You can half time it or double time it. You can change the loop. You can set the loop. So if I wanted the first bar to play from here, it could, and then the second bar would just loop infinitely in this clip, which is really super, super handy in your performance mode. And then the other important thing are these 3 buttons down at the bottom of your clip, which is the trigger and the enveloping. So we're going to start with the trigger. So the trigger is really cool because this is how you tell the clips how long to play, when to play. They can look at other clips. They can repeat infinitely. They can repeat in a random order. This is essentially, when you're building out a performance grid, the sort of guts of how to control the clips in the sequence that they're going to play. So that's super, super important. Usually I do toggle will just, when you press down on your MIDI pad, it will toggle that on and off. Or if you press on the screen, it will toggle it on and off. And it won't do anything else unless you press it. Usually what I do is repeat. Repeat is, it just plays over and over forever. And then you can also do like a follow action. So you can play next after 1 repeat. You can play after 4 repeats. You can play after 32 repeats. And in order for me to not get lost in my grid when I'm performing live, I always have a follow action of next on every single clip, usually of 16. So my clips are built out so that every 16 bars, it's going to jump to the next line of clips unless I tell it on my MIDI controller to not do so. So what that does is I can set up a series of songs one after another, and the set is always going to progress through that set list if I don't touch anything. Now, it's going to sound like crap because it's not going to transition well. I'm not going to be able to improvise or play keys over it or change anything about it or manipulate it in real time, but it would play start to finish, and it would technically be a show. The really fun part is once you get all your grid of audio and MIDI stacked in here, playing with these follow actions, you can do some amazing real-time improvisation. You can do real-time remixing, all kinds of stuff. So if you go to see Anthony Carter's favorite band, Justice, what they've done is a majority of the things that they're playing are playing in follow clips in a computer under the stage. So they're using MIDI controllers to watch those clips and then to play the piano on top of them. So the drum sequences, a lot of the melodies, all of that stuff is pre-built into audio clips. And then they're changing the audio sequence to layer different songs on top of each other and to do like real-time improvisation, or to stop the song, have a breakdown, only play one of the instruments, play some improvisation over it, and then start the song back. So all of that stuff is done here with your launch mode and with your follow actions. So if you're gonna play live, you gotta know those. All right, the next one is enveloping, which is each one of these clips, you can add an envelope to manipulate it. I like to map these envelopes to MIDI so that I can manipulate them in real time. But what it does is it just allows you to sort of like, if you needed to send stuff to the reverb, you could go down here and you could add a reverb send inside the clip. So every time this clip played on the second bar, reverb would splash all over it, right? And then this clip individually gets that little bit of information, and you don't have to do it on the master channel. So you don't have to do it on the big channel at the top. All right, so I think that covers clips. I'm gonna check the chat, see if you guys have any stuff. Anthony says launch mode. Yeah, so launch mode. There's trigger, there's gate, which gate, when you press it and hold it, it plays for as long as you press and hold. Trigger, you tap it, it'll play all the way through. Toggle, you tap it once, it'll go forever. You tap it again, it'll stop. And then repeat, which gives you a number of repeats before it moves to the next one. So I hope that explains it. All right, so that's the basic. That's the basis of this view. And if you see the lights blinking in the background, that is indication of my son, for my son, that it is his bath time. So hopefully he's upstairs taking a bath. The second view we're going to go into now is arrangement view. And this is the view that I work in a majority of the time when I'm actually producing music in Ableton Live. And what arrangement view is it is a linear timeline like you would be used to seeing in a lot of other DAWs. And what I just did is I just clicked this little down arrow to just fold it up so you can see all of the tracks at once. This view allows me to work in a linear grid. So Ableton will always start over here at 0 and work its way out infinitely. Excuse me, this beer's giving me the burps. And that is really great for me because I am a visual person. So it allows me to sort of like visualize the song, to see when instruments come in, to see when instruments come out. But I want to show you a little bit about how to get instruments onto these channels and how to hear them playing. So I'm going to go back to my instrument rack. I'm going to go to wavetable and I'm going to pull down a synth lead. Now you might not be able to hear this because I'm not sure where that audio is routed out of my computer. But you can see when I dropped this Chaotica synthesizer onto the first MIDI channel, it loaded up here in the bottom. You can see its wavetable. If I press a key on my keyboard while this little red button is lit up, it will actually play back, which is really nice. So you don't need a piano to necessarily go in and play in real time. You can work just on your keyboard, which is great if you're on an airplane or sitting on the couch. If you double click any square in the MIDI grid, it automatically makes a MIDI clip. And this MIDI clip provides you with a piano roll at the bottom, and you can draw your notes in for the synthesizer to play, which is really awesome. If you have a MIDI keyboard hooked up, you can simply trigger the MIDI on this channel by selecting the red time key here. This just arms the channel to record MIDI input. So when you trigger this guy, it's listening for any device that's going to send MIDI to it, and then it's going to record those MIDI notes directly onto this channel. But if you don't have that and you just want to start drawing melodies onto the channel, just draw some melodies like I just did. Now, anything in live, you can grab the end, and when you go to the end of the clip, your cursor comes to a little bracket. You want to click and drag, and it will repeat infinitely. So this is another really awesome feature of Live, is that it assumes that everything you play is gonna be a loop in one way or another, which is generally true for most music, like unless it's improvisational jazz, and even then there's some looping going on. But in a general statement, these phrases are gonna repeat over and over again. So it makes that assumption that you're gonna build your track off of loops. So if you played a couple of notes and you recorded them, you can click the end of the clip and drag it out, and it will become a whole series of the same notes over and over and over again. Now, you'll notice down at the bottom, it has provided me here with a clip view since I've created a clip. And a lot of the important stuff down here in the clip view is going to be repeated from the session view screen. But what you should note down here is the loop position information and the loop amount information. So if I wanted to make this loop instead of 1 bar, if I wanted to make it 4 bars, then it gives me the extra 3 bars on the end of that clip, right? I can then go in and change or add different MIDI notes at different scales, and I'm just using the duplicate key here. I'm holding down Option and dragging and dropping them. It's just gonna give me the space to write the rest of my melody, right? So now I've got a melody, I've got a synthesizer, and if I go to the front of the timeline and I see my little button here, I hit play, it will just start to play that synthesizer note through the timeline. Now, you can use the spacebar to stop and start audio at any time. So if you're working on something, you need to listen to something over and over and over again, the spacebar will simply start and stop audio wherever the playhead is in this linear sort of scenario. Now, another really cool thing that I use a lot, and we're going to review sampling next week, is that I use a ton of loops, right? So if I needed a clap, maybe I multi-sampled a clap from an 808, I can drag and drop that into my timeline. De-trigger that. And the clap appears on my timeline. And again, just like the MIDI note, I can drag from either side and repeat that clap over and over and over again. So if you dropped a drum kick onto here and it was repeating at a 16th note, you can drag and drop that forever, and then you'll have a 4/4 drum kick over and over and over again, right? So the other cool thing is, though, if you're playing a guitar or if you're playing a piano and you've plugged it into your sound card and you can record from your sound card from it, you can do the exact same thing here. So what you would do is arm this channel just like you armed it to record a MIDI note, and you would hit record, and you would simply start playing your guitar, and it would record right into this channel, and it would show up there, and then you could start manipulating it. So when you're done recording the guitar part, you could go back in and edit, change, warp, add effects, do all that sort of stuff. All right, so let's talk about manipulating audio that you've dropped onto the timeline. So just like when I double-clicked the MIDI clip, if I double-click the audio clip, it shows the audio down here in place. And remember earlier we talked about warping, that it's warping all of these into place. The cool thing is you can double-click anywhere on this grid and drag the audio to stretch it into a different time signature. So if I wanted the claps to play at a 6/8, or if I wanted the claps to play at some weird polyrhythm, that's super easy to do. You're just going to drag and drop the claps into the place where you want them to land. So you can do this for any instrument. So if somebody recorded some drums for you and you were like, I don't know if this is quite right, like they're not sitting in the pocket, they're not quite how they should be for the song, you could go in and drag each transient for each drum hit into a place that you thought worked really well. But there's also a thing in Live called Groove that makes this a lot simpler. So if I have a series of drums that are electronic, like these are, this was recorded off a drum machine, so it's perfectly gridded, and I wanted them to sound more free-forming, you can enable the groove to sort of move them a little bit off the beat grid and to play more naturally like a human would play them. So if I come into this clip view on the far side and I hit groove, I can change the time signature to be a different time signature than the master clock, which is set to 4/4 in the upper left-hand corner. So if I wanted these to be a 6/8, I could type in 6/8, and then they would play in a 6/8 beat. If I wanted to change the groove, watch how cool this is. So Ableton comes with a core library of swing and groove presets. So if I go into the presets, I hit this little tiny recycle button next to groove, and I hit, say, percussion, and I hit, actually, you know what, we're gonna go with MPC. I love the MPC grooves, and I use them all the time to just totally manipulate all of my drum loops and drum patterns. And what it's gonna do is it's gonna load in different groove settings that are taken from the MPC. So the MPC had the same feature. And part of what made early hip hop so cool was that the MPC could manipulate drums in time to be on a different groove. So I'm just gonna select 63 here, and I'm gonna hit commit. And you see it changed all of the little warp markers down in the bottom of the screen in the clip view, and it stretched my audio. And what it's trying to do is it's trying to put this audio into the groove of that clip. And if you have a sample of audio that you really like the groove, you can load them in this groove setting, and it will manipulate the warping markers inside of any piece of audio to match the audio that you selected. So it's using an algorithm to measure the transients, and then it's going to try to squish and expand those transients into the groove. So you can have your drums play totally different in real time. So this is really cool because what it's doing is it's making the gap between audio manipulation and MIDI a lot less. It's bringing that gap a lot closer together. All right, beer sipping time. Does anybody have any questions in the chat? Cool. All right, we're going to keep going. So, if you tuned in last week, you're going to be familiar with some of this, but I wanted to pull up one of my tracks that I've been working on. Actually, we'll pull up one that we worked on last week. So just keep this going. So my default template when I load in live is going to look much similar to what this file looks like. So I have a series of default audio tracks and default MIDI tracks, but if I don't use them, what I do is I go in and remove them so that it keeps the layout of my songs visually very clear, so I can move in and out of different parts of the song, jump around in the timeline. So let's do a little bit of that. If you move your mouse over the bar counter at the top of the screen, let me see if you can actually see this. Yeah, so it's the dark gray panel that's at the very top. You can click and drag and expand in and out of different parts. So if I needed to manipulate something, like say one kick at the end of a phrase, I could zoom all the way into the timeline and then use a 2-finger drag to move that timeline around, and then to stretch, correct, do anything I needed to. So if you're just getting started with producing and you're using a lot of loop packs, or you're using a lot of audio that you're recording yourself and then dropping into live, this is going to be how you sort of navigate inside live. You're going to use this dark gray bar. The other cool thing is you can click and drag the little expander at the top, and if you've ever used any video editing program, you're going to be familiar with the idea of zooming in and out. Anything where you have to use a timeline, zooming in and out is something you do constantly over and over and over again. And arrangement view in Ableton, definitely, that's when I'm constantly zooming. All right, so I've got a track loaded up. I've dragged a bunch of stuff onto the grid here. I've stretched it out and condensed it. And I need to add some more instruments, right? So this song is not finished. The easiest way to add instruments or audio channels is to hit the create, and you can insert audio track or MIDI track. Now, I just use the keys on the keyboard to do it. So when I need to insert audio, I just hit that. When I need to insert MIDI, I hit that, and it pops in new channels. And then I can go over to, say, my plugins, and I can find a plugin that I want to use, like Massive, which is something I use all the time. Drop it on the MIDI channel, and boom, Massive is ready to go. We can make all kinds of weird dubstep noises. And the same thing goes for audio. Once I drop some audio onto this track, let's go into my samples, and let's just say like a texture loop and drop it on the timeline, and boom, we have weird ambient noise that we're going to stretch through the intro of the song. And I can take that and I can move it around. If I want it in the middle, I can click and drag the top, move it around. I can hit Command R and I can rename it so I know what it is. I can rename the channel, so when I get to do the mix down, you'll notice how every one of my channels is named pretty concisely, and that is so when I'm loading in different things to mix the track down, I know exactly what channel I'm on, because I've dropped the wrong EQ onto the hi-hats before and left it there and then been like, why the hell is this so screwed up? So it's really important to like be concise, be diligent, name things the way they're supposed to be named, clean the tracks up. If you're not using something, get rid of it. Don't leave it hanging around thinking, oh, I might turn this back on tomorrow. You're probably not. Save a different version of it. Save, I'll have V1 through 10 that shows sort of my progress through time. And staying really diligent about doing that is super important, especially when you're going to be working on something for a long period of time. Sometimes I work on tracks for 3 months, and if I don't open it for a week and a half, I don't remember what I've done. I don't remember what K loop 4/6 C minor is. So if I don't name it correctly, there's a chance that I'm probably going to screw it up. So take the time to do that, to be organized inside of Live. Okay, so I dropped this ambient loop in here, and I want to talk a little bit about enveloping. So pretty much all digital audio workstations have enveloping. The cool thing about Live is it takes all of those features that I like, the beat grid and the stretching and the warping, and it applies like the things that you're going to manipulate to that idea of a grid and structure. So let me just give you an example. So I have this ambient track here, right? If I go up to my audio effects and I choose echo and I drop echo on it, now the audio is going to echo. So this channel is going to run the effects, nonstop like crazy. But I don't want the ambient to echo the entire time. I want the ambient to build an echo all the way up to the breakdown, right? So I would take the dry, wet. Dry is how much audio is coming through the process of that effect. And wet means it's 100% audio processed. Dry means it's 0%, right? So what I want to do is increase the amount of echo all the way until the breakdown of the song. So what I would do is I would turn on this little key in the upper right hand arrangement view. So this one right here, you may have just seen it turn blue. And this is gonna appear this little line down here, right? So this little line, because the last thing I clicked was dry wet, is gonna manipulate the dry wet. So anything in Live can be manipulated through this enveloping system. So if you wanted to open the filter on a synthesizer, or if you wanted to change the waveform on a synthesizer mid-song, you could use this envelope to change the track in progression, right? And then to switch it back. So enveloping is sort of the thing that makes everything interesting, because not only are you writing melodies, but you're also then changing the effects or changing something that's happening to the instrument while the melody is happening. So if I wanted it to build all the way to the end, what I would do is I have echo, dry, wet. I would hit this little plus button here, and you saw it duplicate. This is going to give me just a channel for this specific envelope, right? So I'm going to have it start at 0, and I'm just going to double click this little red. Actually, I'm going to zoom in so we can have a nice close view of it. I'm going to double click this envelope. And I'm going to come down here and double click it again. And you see it made these little tiny points. And I'm going to drag echo to 100. So as it's playing through, what you'll notice is, see dry wet is climbing slowly. It's simply following that envelope towards the end. And it's starting at 0, and we're going to watch it climb all the way up, right? So it'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, and it'll follow it. And then if I wanted it to go down in the middle and then up a little bit and then down a little bit and then up a little bit, that's going to be really weird and cool and fun. And there you go. It's kind of a way to manipulate it. Now, if at the same time I wanted it to start to reverb as it climbs, so not only is it echoing, it's also giving this big grand reverb. You see how when I just touched reverb, it appeared on the right-hand side of this track? I'm going to hit that plus button again, and now we have an echo reverb envelope. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to double click to make these little points. I'm going to make a third point, and I'm just going to drag it up. Now, as the track progresses, not only is the dry wet increasing, but the amount of reverb I'm giving it is also increasing. So you'll see this, if you open up other people's sessions, you will see this all over their sessions. I use enveloping to change everything about an instrument. So I'll change sort of the resonance on it. I'll change how much of the filter is opening and closing. And in the same way that you can duplicate audio, you can select these envelopes and you can duplicate them as well. So if I drug audio over here, those envelopes are going to repeat, and I can repeat them over and over and over again. So if I select here and hit duplicate, it'll just duplicate the envelopes infinitely. So you can do all kinds of really fun manipulation. Now, if I was doing this on an audio channel, I could do the same exact thing, controlling the different aspects of the MIDI. So if there was a knob on my keyboard that I wanted to open and close a whole bunch, I could do exactly what I just did with this audio effect, and it would turn the knob on and off, open and close it in the same exact way on the keyboard that I was playing into that channel. So it makes manipulating stuff in real time a lot easier. And you can do this pretty much infinitely, so your effects and your instruments can be constantly changing and evolving, and you just draw on your envelopes for whatever you want them to do. Generally, everything operates in the enveloping world 0 to 100. So 100 is all the way on, and 0 is all the way not on or off. And then everything in between is wherever the envelope lies. And that's a pretty general statement. So if I open up a different track of mine, I'm trying to think which one of these are kind of like done. Yeah, this remix is pretty much done. Let's look at this one. Yes, it is the exact same thing as automation, Jesse. Sorry, I'm a little bit behind on the chat, but yeah, it's the exact same idea. Okay, so here is a remix that I've been working on, and you'll see things get real crazy in here really fast. These are all of my channels stacked. Everything's pretty much named correctly because I'm going to rely on an engineer to help me get the audio correct on it. But what you'll notice here is there are audio clips and instruments inside of folders. So these folders become really important. We call these folders buses. You may have heard that term in Logic as well. A bus is simply a collection of a bunch of different audio inputs or MIDI inputs, channels that are stacked together. And then the benefit of that is if you needed to say EQ all the percussion channels at once, I could simply go over here and drag an equalizer onto that channel, and then I could EQ the entire group of progression in its own channel, right? So that's really cool. And I use the folders a lot because what I do is I make songs. I have an engineer sort of help me mix those songs, and then I export these folders as stems for my live performance. So when I export my live performance, I don't have like 100 clips to make the entire song over again. I have like 6 clips that is the bus for each one of those groupings. So all the bass is together in one group. All of the little percussion parts are together in one group. All the synthesizer leads are in one group. And this simply like makes everything a lot easier to control when it's exported for a live show. I end up with like a quarter as many clips that I have to like control inside the software. And then aside from that, it allows me to do more general mixing correction on any group. So if like a specific frequency, like in this one, I have several kicks stacked on top of each other, and they're canceling each other out because the bass frequencies are the same in both channels. What I'll do is I'll go and EQ one of them differently than the other. So like the slap is only getting the high end of the bass, and the punch is getting like the middle of the bass or the low part of the bass. Or I take all the bass out of both of them so that the bassline synthesizer can sit in that little pocket really nicely. So you could spend months, years, eons learning how to mix things down. That's beside the point. Just simplify things for yourself. When you can group them together, when you can be organized, it'll help you when you get in the room with somebody who is an engineer who can help you get your mix correct. Thanks, Anthony Carter, who's in the chat right now, for helping me get mine correct all the time. It will help you and them stay sane and keep track of everything. All right, so if I open up like, I'm not sure in this track. This is a remix, so it's a little bit different. It has a whole lot of the original stems in it. There's probably some enveloping in here somewhere. I know a lot of it has been recorded to audio too. Oh, another thing we should talk about on the clips. If I turn off the audio, a really cool feature in Ableton is that it automatically puts fade in and out on the beginning of every clip. So what you'll notice is in other audio software, when you start a sample, there'll be a little click. And what that is it's a spike where you actually chop the audio. In order to prevent that in Ableton Live, if I went in and grabbed a sample, and let's just say I was going to chop this breakbeat, I would use Command E. This is a chop command. So you can cut any audio with Command E into pieces, which is really nice. It puts these little toggles at the top of the bar, and those toggles are fader envelopes. So if you drag from one side, it fades in, and if you drag from the other side, it crossfades. So this is your crossfade, and this is your fade in. If you do it from the other side, that's your fade out, right? So you can put really smooth transitional fades on everything, but it confuses a lot of people too, because sometimes they want their audio to be very, very precise, and they can't figure out why there is 100th millisecond of no audio at the beginning of the clip. And that's because by default, Ableton, when you chop the audio, makes these little envelopes. They're teeny tiny envelopes. And for the most part, it's great because it keeps all of your loops and your samples from not clicking all the time. But sometimes when you need precision, it can be confusing and you don't understand why. So keep that in mind. This is also great when you are I think here I have a big ambient wash that comes in the first half of the song, and it comes back again at the end. And I couldn't figure out the transition point where I wanted the ambient to come in, but I knew it sounded really well. And so I put these really long sweeping envelopes. So like my fade in envelope on this for the first one lasts 45 seconds. And the one on the second half of it lasts about a minute. So you can use these. You can also change these envelope, like you can drag the center point of them, and what that'll do is it'll actually change the ramp of the envelope. This is really nice because it'll add transitional easing to the fade. You can do that on regular enveloping as well, which is super cool. So if you wanted an envelope to have an easing ramp, you simply hover over the center part and you just drag it, and then it can change the speed and duration of the transition, which is cool. All right, I'm gonna check the chat. Yes, so a stem refers to the audio that I render out of each one of these channels when it's finished. So when I'm done with a song, if say I want somebody to remix it and they're using a different software than Ableton Live, what I will do is I will select every single layer and I will export every layer as an individual solo piece. And this becomes really important when you're preparing for a live show to have the songs individually. So sometimes if it's for a remix, I'll do every single layer is its own piece of audio. And then sometimes if I'm doing it for a live performance, like I said, I will only export the groups. But the rendered piece of audio that comes out of that finalized is a stem. So you'll hear anybody who's doing remixes refer to those as stems. Also, artists have started selling their stems on Beatport, so you can do your own unofficial remixes. It's a great way to practice production. If you hear a song you like, sometimes you can go on Beatport and that song will be offered in stems. And what that does is they sell you each layer of the song. You purchase that and then you can do your own manipulation of the song in real time. But stem generally just refers to an audio clip. All right. So, Future Everything team, what have I missed here? I think we've run through the basics of arrangement view. Oh, I forgot. There's these little guys over here. So you may notice these guys. So these turn on and off your routing. So you can take them away if you're not going to route stuff. I generally leave them on. They turn on your ability to send returns. And they turn on your time clock channel manipulation, which is something you'll probably never use except for one time ever. So there's a really cool trick where you can offset two channels that are panned opposite of each other to add stereo. It's some trick that one of us in the crew picked up from Claude Von Strock's YouTube channel like 10 years ago, and we use it now on everything. I used to use it on everything. I use it sparingly now because I use different plugins to create the same sort of effect. But essentially what this will do is it will offset that whatever track you manipulated on, it will offset it from the master grid, the amount that you select. So if I wanted this kick drum to be a negative 30 milliseconds off the beat grid, I can change it there and it will allow me to offset. You can also do it like just with the grid marker by double clicking it, it turns blue. Aside from that, if you double click any thing with a 0 to 100 property in Ableton Live, it automatically sets it back to 0. That's a huge time saver when you want to turn something off and it's, you know, it's enveloped and it's changing its time and its amount. You can double click it and it always sets it back to 0, which is really, really good. All right. So some things that you need for resources. The Ableton Live forums are fantastic. YouTube is the best resource ever. There's PML they do online classes and they have a mastering chain that I really love. So if I drop this mastering chain, these are my favorites. So anything that I really like and use a whole bunch, which you can see there's not many things up here, or something that I need to remember to use, you can simply go in here and like if I was going to use this bass loop a whole lot, I could just drag and drop it to my favorites. You can make all kinds of collections too. So if you want to make like a collection of samples just for techno, or if you have a specific group of drum machines that you use a lot, these little folders at the top will allow you to add those things into them so that you can go back and reference them all the time. Anyways, this mastering chain is really simple. I love to use it. So I keep it in my favorites and generally it's on the master of every single track. What you'll notice when I load it in is it's like 20 audio effects stacked on top of each other and they're all turned off. So what they did, now I've done this for my own stuff quite occasionally, is I'll go in and find a stack of audio effects called a rack that I really like, and I'll stack them in this bottom window, and then you can select all of them and group them into a folder together. The cool part about this is then you can map certain parts of those effects to these macros. And when you do, you simplify your mastering chain, or all of those effects fold down into this one thing with like 8 simple controls, right? This is extremely helpful from a visual sense, in that I'm not necessarily paying attention to all the little tiny details that I've already set up, and it speeds up my workflow a whole lot. Another really important pro tip is duplication. And if you watched last week, or if you haven't watched that, maybe what you should do is go watch last week's next. Is the guide to arrangements, is the select and duplicate. So any part of a song that I want to select in arrangement view, and this works in clip view as well, I'll select it on the grid and I can hit Command D and it will duplicate it. Now, if I hit Command Shift D, it will duplicate it and push everything on the other side of it out. So it's really cool. Like if I wanted to extend the center of a song, what I could do is just select it and hit Command Shift D for duplicate, and it would push everything out and it would add those parts in the middle over and over and over again. In the same sense, if I hit Command Shift Delete, it takes them away without destructively taking away everything in that. So if you just hit delete, it just removes it. But if you hit Command Shift Delete, it removes everything on the timeline back to that point. So those keystrokes, whenever I'm working on a project, become extremely powerful. And I know keystrokes for Ableton Live like nobody's business. So it saves me a ton of time stacked on top of one another. All right. Beer time, beer time. How's it going, guys? Any other questions? Cool. Everybody's getting some dinner. All right. What else should we talk about? So, when you are in arrangement view and something is too loud, right? 9 times out of 10 when I'm working with new producers, everything in their chain is clipping above 0 dB and it's like crunchy and they don't know why, and they just want it to be loud like it's on the radio, but instead it's just distorted. They don't understand what the hell's going on. You can go back from arrangement view into session view, and this is generally like the audio mixer, right? So you can think about if you were running like live house sound in a concert venue, the big mixing board with all the channels on it. This is performing in the exact same way. And what I do is, or what is really cool, is you can go into this view and select multiple channels and drag them down, or you can like reduce their volume. So let's say I reduced it to like -20. They would all reduce down to -20, and then I can mix up. This is a really great way to start mixing your tracks. So generally with new producers, what I'll tell them, if they haven't started the track at a lower dB like I did, like I started the example at like -14, what I'll do is I'll go back and drag all of their audio in every single channel to 0. And then I'll mix by bringing in each instrument, one instrument at a time, to a certain volume. And this technique is really great. There's several YouTube tutorials on starting from 0 with your mix downs. You can like Google starting from 0 with a mix down. Turning all the instruments down and then slowly turning them up one at a time until they sit pleasantly with each other. Now, when all the instruments are playing with one another and nothing is on the master chain, you generally want them to be hitting at about -6 to -4. So if all of my audio is playing here at once, what we have here at the bottom, you can see mine's sitting really low. It's sitting at like -12 now. If I tap this little tiny button just above the mixer, you'll see it turning yellow. It's giving me the RMS output. So it's giving me the highest peak output of audio at that point in the song. And when I listen to the song all the way through, that should probably be no higher than -4 in order for the person who's going to master my tracks to be able to have enough headroom to actually master them. But if all of my instruments were way too loud, the first thing I would do is start by selecting all the tracks and dragging them to 0. And then one by one, bringing each one up individually until they all sat collectively at -4 to -6 dB. That generally helps you sort of like rein in things when you're a new producer and you can't figure out something is clipping, something is distorting, something is not sounding right, and it's a volume issue. The other really cool thing is there is an amazing audio effect unit called Utility. and it is the simplest plugin that is in Ableton. It works by doing just a couple of really small things. You can change the stereo width of something. You can put things into mono. You can shift the bass just into mono. You can change the gain and the balance of something. But the gain is the important part here, because anything that is too loud, like the other day I was working with a producer that had automated some of their volume sliders. And so I couldn't bring the volume slider down because every time I did, the automation envelope would make it move. So I can simply use utility to drop the decibels or the output of that channel here instead of touching the actual gain sliders on the mixing board. That's a super, super handy tool that I use a whole lot. And the other thing is putting things in mono. So your bass generally, as a rule for music, should be in mono. Subs pretty much always run in mono. But there's other things that I like to run mono in the mix, just depending on what they are. Some of my drum elements I like to sit dead center, and so mono, switching to mono is a really quick and easy way to do that. Some samples that I get have stereo field in them when they should not. That's super common. So I'll get a stereo field where in the left ear, the hi-hat is playing a 20 milliseconds slower than the right ear. I can simply shift them into mono or send one channel to both channels using this utility tool, and it makes correcting that really, really super easy. So utility is definitely your friend. That's a great tip and trick. But you might find yourself jumping back and forth between these two views while you're working. The other part that's really important that I don't think I talked very much about is the looping function. So when you're working in a track and you're trying to dial something in, like you're trying to play a melody correctly, or you're trying to warp a piece of audio into place, or you're just trying to mix, sometimes it's really handy to loop the audio. So Command L will loop any audio that you have selected. So like if I had these kick drums selected, I could hit Command L and it would just loop those kick drums. Or you can take that loop and drag it anywhere in the timeline, and when the playhead is inside of it, it will loop inside of just that. So see, now we're just looping inside here. These guys control what part are looping, and you'll notice when you are in the other view that actually works as well. So if you were in the middle of the song, the crowd was really feeling it, and you wanted to give like a sick guitar solo, you could hit that loop button and the song would loop in that one point until you finished, and then you could trigger it again and it would unloop and continue playing. So that's a really, really super handy feature that I use a ton, because sometimes I just need to get a shaker to sound right, or I played a melody off key and it sounds horrible and I want to go back and replay it. So that's a general really, really great thing to use. All right. Cranking right through this. Cool. Any questions? No, we're good. All right. So I think I've pretty much covered it. If there's anything that hasn't been covered or that I missed, I'm going to try to go back and re-record this with the proper camera setup and working off 2 laptops in a little while, and I'll repost that on this YouTube channel because the whole not streaming thing sort of threw me off for a second. But if there are any questions, you can post them on the chat, or you can send them to my social media at MarceauxMarceaux. I am always responsive to Ableton Live, and I do screen shares with people who have questions, or I do all kinds of like tutoring or advice, or if you're ready to dig deeper into any one of these subjects, more than happy to help with that. Oh, I covered send receive at the very beginning, but I'll cover it again because it's super easy. So when you have a send or return channel, I'm going to turn them on so that we have them. This channel does not have one, so let's just start a new one real quick so you can see. I deleted all the sends off that one. I didn't need them. Okay, so when you want to send and return audio, you have to turn on the S and the R on this side. And by default, Ableton makes you one with reverb and one with delay. That's just to show you that they're working, essentially, because the reverb and delay is turned on. So if you hear the reverb and delay, then you know you've sent and received the audio back to the channel in the correct way. If you have audio, I'm just going to drag some audio onto here. You probably won't be able to hear it. That's fine. You don't need to. And I hit play. If I slide the slider up on my send for A, it is sending the reverb to A, right? I send it to B. Now it's sending the audio to B. Now, the sends are returning to the master. So it has its own directional system as well, so you can route it to whatever you want. It's routed to the master, so as I turn up A, I hear the reverb, and as I turn up B, I hear the delay. But the really cool thing is you can send that back to a different channel if you wanted to. So you could send the processed audio over here to channel 4, and if you did that, let's just send some stuff to B. Okay, so there's delayed audio playing through B and then sending to 4. You can record that processed audio again over here, and the processed audio from the send will then contain whatever you did in the formatted audio, which is great. So there's this crazy dubstep producer called Il Gates, and this week he did a tutorial on this exact thing on Ableton's website. So if you log on to Ableton right now, under like the featured artist section, the Il Gates tutorial has an awesome send return sort of technique that is super simple, and I use that a lot to resample, but I also use it a lot in my live show to send anything I know that's going to have a reverb on it. I'll send all those channels out to the reverb and back, so I don't have to drop 20 reverbs on each channel. And that makes it really simple, and it saves a ton of processor, especially when my live show probably has 1,000 clips in it or whatever. It saves a whole lot. So hopefully that works. Yeah, I absolutely love doing these. So we're going to record several more. I think I'm going to try to do them all the way through April. The next one next week will be advanced sampling techniques. So I'm going to talk about how to warp your files correctly, how to manipulate samples, how to use the sampler in a bunch of different ways. And we're going to dig right into sampling, because what I found is plugins are super expensive, and money shouldn't be a barrier to making music, and you can sample anything. You can sample pots and pans, you can sample yourself breathing, you can sample I talked to a friend today that was in his backyard sampling, just field recording a bullfrog to put into his music. So I think that knowing how to manipulate those samples and make music out of them is super important starting point for anybody who wants to jump into music production. And then you're not hindered by the cost of really expensive add-on software. The default Ableton software is amazing, and there's people who make their entire career off of the default instruments in Ableton. But if you really want to expand your world outside of those default instruments and sound, the next thing you need to start doing is sampling and then learning synthesis, how to use synthesizers. So I'm going to dip off for tonight and go put my kid to bed. I love you all very much. If you have more questions, again, hit me on social media. I love doing one-on-one stuff, and we'll pick the stream back up next week with less technical difficulties. So thanks, everybody.